"I just want to see him why balance," said the waitress. Billionaire laughed till he saw the screen. The ATM screen glowed in the darkness outside the 24-hour diner, and Emma stood there with her card trembling in her hand. It was 2 in the morning, and she'd just finished a double shift that left her feet aching and her back stiff. She needed to check her balance, needed to know if she had enough to cover her mother's prescription and still make rent. Behind her, she heard footsteps and a low chuckle. A man in an expensive coat was waiting, probably amused by how long she was taking. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she fumbled with a worn card, its magnetic strip so faded she had to swipe it 3 times before it worked. "I just want to see my balance," she whispered, more to herself than to him. But when the numbers finally appeared on that screen, everything changed. The man's laughter died in his throat, and Emma's world tilted sideways. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Emma had been working at Miller's Diner since she was 22, back when her mother's medical bills first started piling up faster than she could count. 3 years later, she knew every crack in the linoleum floor, every table that wobbled, every regular customer's order by heart. The diner sat on the corner of 5th and Marshall, the kind of place where coffee was always hot and nobody judged you for eating breakfast at midnight. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and most days that felt like enough. Her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's 2 years ago, and the medications that kept her hands steady and her mind clear cost more than Emma made in a month. Insurance covered some of it, but there were always co-payers, always something extra the pharmacy said wasn't included. Emma had taken on every shift she could get, working mornings at Miller's and evenings at a banquet hall across town when they needed extra servers. She was 25 and felt 50, but she kept smiling because that's what you did. You kept going. That particular night had been brutal. A bachelorette party had come in at 10, drunk and demanding, leaving a mess of spilled drinks and barely any tip. Then old Mr. Peterson had stayed until closing, nursing a single cup of coffee and telling her about his late wife, and Emma didn't have the heart to rush him. By the time she locked up and headed home, it was past 1:30 in the morning. She'd passed the ATM outside the bank next door 1,000 times, but tonight something made her stop. She needed to transfer money from her savings, what little was left of it, to cover the prescription she had to pick up in the morning. The card reader was finicky, and she had to swipe her worn debit card multiple times, aware that someone had walked up behind her. "Take your time," a man's voice said, but there was amusement in it, the kind that comes from someone who's never had to worry about a bank balance in his life. Emma glanced back and saw him, tall, maybe 50, with silver hair and a cashmere coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He had his phone out, clearly impatient but trying to be polite about it. She felt a flash of shame, that familiar feeling of being judged for being poor, for being tired, for taking too long at an ATM because her card was old and worn from too much use. "Sorry," she mumbled, turning back to the screen. "I just want to see my balance." The words came out more vulnerable than she intended, almost like confession. She pressed the button for account balance and held her breath, the way she always did, hoping the number wouldn't be as low as she feared. The screen flickered, loading, and behind her she heard the man shift his weight, probably checking his watch. Then the numbers appeared. Emma blinked again. That couldn't be right. Her checking account, which should have had maybe $300 in it, showed a balance of $847,293.12. Emma stayed at the screen until the numbers blurred. Her first thought was that she was looking at someone else's account, that the machine had made a terrible mistake. But no, there was her name at the top, Emma Rose Mitchell, and her account number. Her heart started hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Everything okay?" the man asked, his voice closer now. She should have said yes, should have grabbed her card and walked away. But instead, she turned to look at him, her face pale in the blue glow of the screen. I think something's wrong with the machine." He stepped forward, concerned now rather than impatient. When he glanced at the screen, his expression changed completely. The amusement vanished, replaced by something Emma couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also recognition. "That's your account?" he asked quietly. "Yes, but that's not... I don't have that kind of money. I've never had that kind of money." Her voice was shaking now. Someone made a mistake. A big mistake. The man studied her for a long moment, then looked back at the screen. "What's your mother's name?" he asked suddenly. Emma felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "What?" "Your mother. What's her name?" "Catherine. Catherine Mitchell. Why, how do you?" He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were bright with something that looked like tears. "I'm James Hartford," he said, "and your mother saved my daughter's life 23 years ago." The story came out in the cold night air, with the ATM screen still glowing behind them. Emma's mother had been a nurse back then, working in the pediatric ICU. James Hartford's daughter, his only child, had been 6 years old when she'd come in with bacterial meningitis. The doctors had given her a 20% chance of survival. Catherine Mitchell had stayed by that little girl's bedside for 3 days straight, through every seizure, every spike in fever, monitoring her so closely that she caught the moment when the infection started winning and got the doctors to change the antibiotic protocol. She'd saved his daughter's life with her vigilance and her refusal to give up. "I tried to thank her," James said, his voice rough. "Tried to give her money, anything. She refused, said she was just doing her job." He smiled sadly. "My daughter is 31 now. She's a doctor herself, working at the same hospital. I've been looking for your mother for years, wanting to pay back what I owed her. I finally found her 6 months ago." Emma felt tears streaming down her face. "She never told me. She never said anything about you or your daughter or—" "That's why I set up a trust fund," James continued. "I wanted to give her the money directly, but I knew she'd refuse again. So I waited. I had my lawyers arrange it so the fund would transfer to her account automatically when she—" He stopped, his throat working. "I heard about a diagnosis. I'm sorry. I wanted her to have this money now, while she can use it. But the account was set up in your name for tax purposes, transferring from a trust one established years ago." Emma couldn't speak. She looked back at the glowing screen, at the impossible number that suddenly made sense. Not a mistake. Not an accident. A gift from someone who remembered kindness shown to a dying child 23 years ago. "She can't work anymore," Emma whispered. "The medications help, but she gets tired so easily. I've been trying to cover everything, but it's so expensive, and I can't." Her voice broke. James reached out and gently took her hand. "You don't have to anymore," he said. "Your mother gave me back my daughter. Let me give you both back your lives." If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Emma stood there in the cold, holding the hand of a stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all, and felt something inside her chest unlock, a tight, desperate knot she'd been carrying for so long she forgot what it felt like to breathe without it. Emma didn't go home right away. She sat on the bench outside the bank, still clutching her ATM receipt, while James Hartford sat beside her and told her about his daughter. Her name was Sophie, and she was married now with 2 children of her own. She graduated medical school top of her class and chose pediatrics because of a nurse who'd saved her life. She worked night shifts sometimes, James said, because she wanted to be there for the sickest kids, the ones who needed someone to refuse to give up on them. "She talks about your mother sometimes," James said softly. "She doesn't remember much from when she was sick. She was so young. But she remembers a woman with kind eyes who sang to her when she was scared. She remembers feeling safe." Emma thought about her mother, about how she'd come home from those night shifts exhausted but always smiling, always asking Emma about her day. How she'd never talk about the hard cases or the children she couldn't save, only the small victories. A fever breaking, a smile from a frightened kid, a parent's tearful thank you. That was who Catherine Mitchell was. Someone who carried other people's sorrows quietly, never asking for recognition, never expecting anything in return. "I need to tell her," Emma said suddenly. "I need to go home and tell her right now." But when she stood up, her legs felt weak. The adrenaline that had been holding her together started to fade, replaced by a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her down. 3 years of exhaustion, of worry, of lying awake at night doing math in her head. How much for prescription? How much for rent? Could she skip lunch to save a few dollars? All of it crashed over her at once. James caught her elbow, steadying her. "When did you last eat?" he asked gently. "I had some fries at the diner during my break." "Around 7. He shook his head, looking at her with the same kind of concern her mother used to show her patients. "Come on," he said. "There's a diner open down the block." You need food, and you need to sit down for a minute before you drive anywhere. They ended up at a place almost identical to Miller's, the same warm booze, the same smell of coffee and bacon grease. The waitress who served them was about Emma's age, and Emma watched her move through her shift with that same tired grace Emma knew so well. She ordered breakfast even though it was almost 3 in the morning, and when the food came, she realized she was starving. James ordered coffee and watched her eat with a small smile. "You work hard," he said. "Your mother told me when I finally tracked her down. She's proud of you." "She shouldn't have to be proud of me for just surviving," Emma said quietly. "She should be resting. She should be spending her days reading in the garden like she always wanted, not worrying about whether we can afford her medications." "Now she can," James said simply. Emma set down her fork, tears threatening again. "I don't know how to accept this. It's so much money. It feels like I don't deserve it." "Your mother deserved it," James said firmly. "She gave me everything when she saved Sophie. She gave me my daughter's wedding day, my grandchildren's births, every Christmas morning and birthday party and ordinary Tuesday that I might have lost. You can't put a price on that. But I tried, and even this amount doesn't come close." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Don't insult her gift by refusing it. She earned this. You both did." Emma thought about all the nights she'd fallen asleep wondering how long she could keep going. All the times she'd smiled through her exhaustion at the diner, pretending everything was fine. All the dreams she'd put on hold, college, travel, maybe someday a family of her own, because survival took everything she had. "What do I do now?" she whispered. James smiled. "Whatever you want. That's the point. Have you ever faced something like this? Share your story in the comments." Emma drove home as the sun started to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her mother would be awake soon, starting her day with a careful routine of medications and exercises that kept her body working. But today, Emma would tell her that everything had changed. That kindness given freely 23 years ago had found its way back to them, multiplied beyond measure. Catherine Mitchell was sitting at the kitchen table when Emma walked in, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, trembling slightly the way they did in the mornings before her medication kicked in. She looked up when Emma entered, concern immediately crossing her face. "Honey, what are you doing home? I thought you were working until—" She stopped, seeing something in Emma's expression. "What's wrong?" Emma sat down across from her mother and took those trembling hands in hers. "Nothing's wrong, Mom. Everything's right. Finally." She took a deep breath. "Do you remember a little girl named Sophie Hartford? 23 years ago, pediatric ICU." Her mother's face went still. "The little girl with meningitis," she said softly. "She was so small and so sick. I didn't think she would make it." Her eyes searched Emma's face. "Why? What about her?" "She made it because of you, because you wouldn't give up on her." Emma's voice broke, and her father never forgot. She told her mother everything, about the ATM, about James Hartford waiting in the dark, about the trust fund that had been established years ago, waiting for the right moment to change their lives. Catherine listened with tears streaming down her face, shaking her head in disbelief. "I was just doing my job," she whispered. "I didn't do anything special." "You saved his daughter's life, Mom, and she became a doctor because of you. She saves other kids now, keeps other parents from losing their babies. What you did rippled out into the world in ways you never saw." Catherine looked down at their joined hands, at the tremor she couldn't control anymore, at the evidence of a disease that was slowly stealing her body's cooperation. "I never wanted you to sacrifice your life for me," she said quietly. "These past few years, watching you work yourself to exhaustion, giving up everything to take care of me." "Stop," Emma said firmly. "You taught me what love looks like. You taught me that some things are worth sacrificing for. But now we don't have to sacrifice anymore. We can both breathe for the first time in years." They sat there in the growing morning light, holding hands across the kitchen table, crying and laughing in equal measure. The weight that had been crushing them both, the constant worry, the endless calculations, the fear of what would happen when the money ran out, lifted like fog burning away in sunshine. "What do you want to do first?" Emma asked. Really, truly, if you could do anything. Catherine was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was full of wonder. "I want to go to the ocean," she said. "I want to sit on a beach and watch the waves and not worry about how much the trip costs or whether we can afford the time away. I want to remember what it feels like to just be." "Then that's what we'll do," Emma said. "We'll go next week. We'll rent a house right on the beach, and we'll stay as long as you want." 2 days later, Emma walked into Miller's diner to give her notice. Not because she was too good for the work now, but because she wanted to go back to school, finish the nursing degree she'd started and had to abandon when her mother got sick. She wanted to follow in Catherine's footsteps, to be the kind of person who saves lives and never asks for anything in return. Her boss, Danny, hugged her tight when she told him. "You're going to be incredible," he said, "but I'm going to miss having you here." The regulars made her promise to visit, and old Mr. Peterson slipped a card into her hand as she was leaving. Inside, he'd written, "I always knew you were meant for bigger things. Your kindness made my lonely nights bearable. Thank you." Emma stood outside the diner where she'd spent 3 years of her life, looking at its neon sign in the afternoon light, and felt nothing but gratitude. This place had held her together when everything else was falling apart. The people here had been her family when she felt most alone. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe for more heartwarming tales. That evening, James Hartford called. Sophie wanted to meet them, he said. She wanted to thank Catherine in person for the gift of her life. They arranged dinner for the following week, and Emma spent the days leading up to it feeling nervous and excited in equal measure. The restaurant James chose was elegant but warm, with soft lighting and fresh flowers on every table. Emma and her mother arrived first, and Catherine's hands were shaking, not from her disease, but from emotion. "I don't know what to say to them," she whispered. "What do you say to someone whose life you saved?" "You'll know," Emma said, squeezing her hand. When Sophie Hartford walked in with her father and her family, Emma recognized her immediately. She had her father's eyes, but her smile was all kindness, the kind that came from understanding suffering. She walked straight to Catherine and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands with the gentle competence of someone who'd spent years caring for the sick. "I don't remember your face," Sophie said softly, "but I remember your voice. You sang 'You Are My Sunshine' to me when I was scared. Sometimes, when I'm with a frightened child in the hospital, I sing it to them, and I think of you." Catherine's tears came then, and Sophie stood to embrace her, and James put his arm around Emma, and for a moment they were all connected by a thread of grace that had been woven 23 years ago and had been waiting all this time to pull them back together. They ate dinner and shared stories. Sophie's children, 8 and 6, sat wide-eyed as their grandfather told them about the nurse who'd saved their mother's life. Sophie talked about her wake, the children she'd helped, the families she'd seen through their darkest nights. "I do what you taught me," she told Catherine. "I stay when it's hard. I don't give up. I remember that every life matters." Later, after dessert had been served and the children had grown sleepy, James handed Emma a folder. Inside were papers establishing a scholarship fund in Catherine Mitchell's name, dedicated to helping nursing students who'd had to interrupt their education due to family hardship. "Your mother's legacy shouldn't just be Sophie," James said. "It should be all the nurses who'll help others because she made it possible for them to finish their training." Emma looked at her mother, whose face was radiant with joy and gratitude, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace? Maybe. Or just a simple certainty that goodness existed in the world, and that kindness was never wasted, even when it felt invisible. The next week, Emma and Catherine drove to the coast. They rented a small house with a porch that overlooked the ocean, and they spent their days walking on the beach and their evenings watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that took their breath away. Catherine's hand still trembled, and she still had bad days when the disease made everything harder. But now she could rest. Now she could breathe without the weight of financial terror crushing her chest. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the wave roll in, Catherine turned to Emma and said, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Emma said. "Promise me you'll live your life now. Not just work and sacrifice and survive, but really live, fall in love, travel, make mistakes, be young while you still can." Emma smiled, feeling the ocean breeze on her face, tasting salt and freedom. "I promise, Mom. We both will." 3 months later, Emma started nursing school. She worked part-time at Miller's on weekends, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to stay connected to the place that had taught her resilience. She was the oldest student in most of her classes, and she didn't care. She studied hard and thought often about Sophie Hartford, about following in the footsteps of women who dedicated their lives to healing. The money in the bank account meant security, yes, but more than that, it meant possibility. It meant that a single act of kindness, performed without expectation of reward, could echo through time and change everything. It meant that the world was more interconnected than it seemed, that grace existed, and that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, doing the right thing came back to you in ways you never imagined. On the anniversary of the night she'd stood at that ATM, Emma drove back to the bank where it had all changed. The same machine glowed in the darkness, and she stood before it with a sense of wonder. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, exhausted, frightened, carrying a burden too heavy for anyone to bear alone. And she thought about who she was now, a woman with dreams again, with a future that stretched out bright and open before her. She didn't check her balance. She didn't need to. Instead, she stood there for a moment in gratitude, then walked back to her car and drove home to her mother, who was waiting with tea and stories about her day. The ocean trip had been the first of many. There would be more adventures, more sunsets, more ordinary beautiful days to collect like shells on a beach. And someday, when Emma was a nurse herself, she would stay late with a frightened child. She would hold a parent's hand through the darkest night. She would show up with kindness and competence and refuse to give up, even when giving up seemed easier. And maybe, years from now, that kindness would ripple out into the world in ways she'd never see, creating miracles she'd never know about, saving lives that would go on to save other lives. That was the real gift James Hartford had given them. Not just money, but the knowledge that every act of love matters, that no kindness is ever truly lost, and that sometimes the world finds a way to balance its accounts in the most unexpected ways. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Thank you for spending your time with us today.